morning, Rabbi said. This year is called Nishmas. So, let's do it. We started this year. So coming out of Tisha B'Av, we now have the next holiday, which is actually what the topic of the evening, Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av in modern Israel, which is actually known as, if I'm not mistaken, the Jewish Valentine's Day. It was a love holiday, and the earlier settlers, writers, poets, they wrote about describing different festivals that would go on in cities in Eretz Yisrael on Tu B'Av. Now, at one point, it fell into demise, and Tu B'Av just became a day without much significance to it. But in Halacha, in Svarim, in the more Jewish history, not just in the literature, we do find that there was an Indian Legabe Tafnan, for example. We find back to Rishonim, the time of Maram Miratenberg. We find Maria. We find a bunch of places who wouldn't say Tafnan. The Ram actually says in Gimel, he said that we wouldn't say Tafnan, even though the Shulchan Aruch brings down right then, he said Megillas Tainus. Megillas Tainus was from the time of the Tanoim. They had a whole list of a bunch of Yom Tovim besides for the main holidays as we know them. There are a bunch of other Yom Tovim which are listed over there. And all those Yom Tovim, they were eating what you can be master and you can't, and yet all of those were batal after the Korban, and we only keep the, so to say, the biblical ones besides Hanukkah and Purim. So included in that list was Tu B'Av. So says the Magen Avram that because, however, Tu B'Av is actually mentioned in the Torah, he said that's why he's marked that we wouldn't say Tafnon. The Maril, if he made a neder that he wouldn't eat basar, he wouldn't keep it on Tu B'Av and others. He wouldn't, because it had significance to it. The Levush also a bunch of places. Point being that there was something to it. So what was this something? We just read in Eicha, the roads of Tzion were desolate. They were mourning. Nobody was coming. All its gates were empty, were shemim, desolate. Nobody was using the doors. Her besulais, her maidens, vihimarla, were nugos. They were mourning. Vihimarla, and it was bitter for her. Says the Targum. Who this Targum is, that's another discussion. We have two different Targum, because we know the Gemara Megillah tells us who wrote the Targum to Nevi'im, Yonas ben Uziel. He wanted to go ahead and write Ksuvim. Hashem stops him. He refrains. Who wrote the Ksuvim? It's a question. There's two different ones. We have a Yemenite Targum, and then the classic one, so to say, that we have. One is more literal, one is more allegorical. The one, if I'm not mistaken, in this Amar, Chumash, is the more allegorical one, which is interwoven in it, Midrashim and other Pirushei Chazal. This Targum was early, date-wise, and says the Targum, Besultava Safdan, the Besulis of Tzion were Safdan, they were Seifet, and they were mourning, because they would stop, they had stopped going out on the 15th of Av, and on the day of Yom Kippur, that is on the 10th of Tishrei, to go out and dance with her, and therefore it was bitter on her heart. So you see that the 15th of Av had some parallel to the 10th of Tishrei, Yom Kippur, that they would go out and dance. What was the parallel of Yom Kippur? You would think the most solemn day of the year. You would think Tu B'Av, just a random day after the summer, we just got a Tisha B'Av, Mashiach didn't yet come, so maybe it's nothing significant. So for that we have the Mishnah, for which I forgot to bring. The Mishnah, that's the main part of the Shir, Mishnah and Tainus. If I can get please the Mishnah and Tainus. Or Mesechta, about it. The Mishnah starts on Kavod. Says the Mishnah. Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. The end of the Mishnah like, "Hayu Yom Tov Yisrael kechamisha asar ba'av u'kiyom haKippurim." There were no greater Yom Tov in Yisrael as Chamisha Asar B'Av and Yom Kippur. Rashi said that. No offense at all to the art school, just the coloring and the boldness I like. There were no greater days between these as these two. That seems quite a paradox. So the Mishnah continues. What would happen? What transpired then? Shebehen b'nei Yushalayim yotzes teflei lavan she'ulin. The b'nei Yushalayim would go out in white garments that were borrowed. Shalei levayish es misha ein lo. Not to embarrass somebody who didn't have such nice pristine garments. So they would swap, or they would borrow one from another, and everybody now had nice white garments. And they would go out and dance on these 2 days. Misha ein kol hakelim to unin tvila. All these kelim, all these begadim that they would wear, kelim, the synonymous with begadim, would need tvila. Uvnei Yerushalayim yotzes v'cholos v'chramim. They would go out and they would cholos. They would play their flutes in the kramim, in the vineyards. What would they say? Bachor, young man, sana yinecha. Lift your eyes and find for who or what you choose. Don't look at the external beauty. Don't look at prettiness. Look at the lineage. It also states, it's questionable, maybe if we'll get to it, who's still saying this? Is this all Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? He's bringing this other pasuk. Says the Mishnah, so Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, he's equating the two. He says, no, we didn't have greater Yom Tov as Yom Kippur and Chamisha B'Av. What happened? And he goes on to describe the events of God dancing. It begs the question: did this, when he described, whoever is describing, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is describing, let's presume that he's the one who was still talking, that they would go out and dance. They were dancing even on Yom Kippur. They had a whole singles event after davening. When did this happen? And why Yom Kippur? So says the Gemara. The Gemara asks this obvious question. Gemara, the end of Tainus on Laman Amud Beis. So that's Gemara. Bishlam Yom Kippurim. I understand why it was a festive day. Mishum this basically Chol Mechila. There was a, so to say, Matan Torah on that day. There was Slicho Mechila, and there was the second Luchos. Like Rashi says, he gives a whole cheshbon. Shavas B'Tammuz is broken. Before Moshe goes back up, it comes down. He's Mispal. Hashem is Moichel V'Seleach, and then they get the second Luchos, so it's like a Matan Torah. And then Rashi ends off. V'oisei hayoim nikba liyom kippur. Lahidi Hashem mochal. Hashem was mochal v'nicham al hara. Asher diva l'aseh l'amim. Ve'al kein nikba tzem kippur ba'asar b'tishrei kach shamati. So Yom Kippur, I can understand why it was a festive day. L'chayr, it wasn't during the day. even though, granted, their liturgy wasn't like ours, they didn't have all these people and everything, so they must ended davening much earlier. But it was probably at some point at the end of the day. So Yom Kippur, they felt the Mechila and Slicha, they go out, they dance, wonderful. Ela Tuba Avmai asks him, Tuba, what was the significance then? It was the day when the Shvatim were allowed to intermarry. There was tribal marriages. A Ruveni would marry Shemaynis, Shemaynis would marry Zvulun, and so on. My daughters, they made a drasha then. The pasuk says in the whole story of the Bnei Tzlafkad, what happens? They come to Moshe Rabbeinu, they tell him Avinu Meis Bamidbar, and he didn't have any kids. He wasn't in that whole parish over there. He died, then Meis. So he didn't have any sons, so why should we lose that now? We lose the whole Nachala? They say, so Moshe turns, okay, you have a taina. He says, good question. He goes to Hashem tells them, came to nice Tzlot B'Doivos. They're fakra, they have a good taina. So they get their father's Nachala. Okay? What happens? They're from B'nai Tzlot, from B'nai Menashe, coming from Yosef. Yosef was split into two. So comes along the B'nai Menashe, and they say, wait, hold on. If the women are now going to get their father's Nachala, so they'll end up intermarrying. Someone from Menashe is going to go marry Yisachar. And then, eventually, after a few years, it's done. There's no more Nachala. Lama Yigar Nachala Seino. So Moshe says, good time. He goes to Hashem again. Hashem says, they're right. Everyone's right. The Bnei Menashe right, and Bnei Tzlafkad are right. So Hashem tells Moshe, and Moshe gives us in terms of the whole dinim of Nachala. And he says like this: the girls, they can inherit their father. There's no boys. They're going to go to a different shevet, so everyone stays in their own shevet. And now it's subsumed, all stays within the shevet. So till then, there was everyone Reuben married Reubenites, everyone Shimon married Shimonites. Till we get to later. In history, there is. Because as of then again, no intermarriage. Fine. Gemara is telling us that what happened in Tuba Av? Hutu Shvatim Lava Zebazeh. When was it Hutu Lava Zebazeh? Because they made a drasha. Zeh Davar Shesiva Noy Levnei Tzlafkad. Davar Zeh Yehinoik Ela Bedor Zeh. Only in this generation they made a drasha, meaning in the Dar HaMidbar. Later on, once we're in Eretz Yisrael, once all the nachos were already divided, so then everyone can intermarry, tribal intermarriages, that is. What was the next case, the next drasha? And when did this drasha that they just made to permit the intermarriages? This happens at the end of Shoftim. At the end of Shoftim, we have the story of Pelegish Begiva. Story of Pelegish Begiva, a horrific Jewish incident of basically a Ma'aser Sodom. The young girl was raped to death. The Zignei Yisrael, they say this is an atrocity. We have to excommunicate Binyamin. They want to cut off Binyamin, and they make a shul. Nobody's allowed to give their kids to their daughters to Bnei Binyamin. What would happen eventually? So you can end up having a shevet that's completely cut off of Bnei Yisrael. So go back and forth. Then they finally come. The Zignei Ha'eda come to the rest of the Shvatim, and they say, we're going to end up declining. And there's going to be no more, there's not going to be a remnant. So they give an eitzah like this. Vayoimru. So they tell them, Hine chag adinoi b'shila, at the end of Shoftim. There's a chag that we have for Hashem, b'shila. Miyomim yamima. Annual, an old day. There's an old holiday that they would celebrate. Hashem Mitzvah Leveisa Mizrach HaShemesh. That was eastward. And during this holiday that they would have in Shiloh, he tells that they say, "Veitzav was b'nei Binyamin lemar, l'chu, go there, ba'aravtem ba'kramen, go lie in ambush in these vineyards." Or you can see the girls of Shiloh going out to dancing. Come out of the vineyards, grab yourselves a wife from Shiloh, go back to Binyamin, all is good. That's what happens. Okay, very nice. The Sefer tells us at the end that that's what happens. Everyone goes there, it's ambush, Givaldi. With that information, let's see weiter in the Gemara. Amar Yosef Rav Nachman, Yom Shehuter Shevet Binyamin Lovi B'Kamal. Shenemar V'ish Yisrael Nishba B'Mitzvah Lemer Ish Mimenu Loyitin B'Yidem L'Binyamin L'Isha. Because they made a shvuah over there. Ish Mimenu should give his ditoi L'Binyamin. My Dorosh, what drasha did they make to permit Binyamin to come back into the fold? Amarav Mimenu V'Lo Mibanenu. It was only for that time. Or they said only for those people who were involved, but not for their progeny. So what happened here? They and l'chayr, according to the Gemara, this happened in Tuba. So the Ziknei to tell them they wanted to somehow come up with a trick, a loophole, some type of Jewish legal subterfuge. They say, you know what, there's something going on. There's some type of chag in Shiloh. During that chag, we'll do this. What was this chag, and when was this chag? Because it seems like it was Miyam and Yamima. It happened way before. And if the Gemara is telling us that this whole thing with the Hutru Shvatim Zelazah and also Binyamin to come back in happened on Tu B'Av, but 1 second, the Navi there was telling us that Tu B'Av, when this happened, was really based on a chag that was in Yom and Yamima, much earlier. Well, keep that in mind. But everyone agrees it must have been something that even preceded this Tu B'Av when we permitted Binyamin to join the fold and the Shvatim were able to intermarry. Then the Gemara.
Why couldn't they do a Taras Nedarim? That's all. A Taras Nedarim.
Why couldn't they do a Taras Nedarim? They can make it was a Shvuah. Why couldn't they be matter the Shvuah? The Israel didn't want to be matter the Shvuah. It was Binyamin who had a problem.
But they brought in that kind of corruption. They suggested them.
They brought in what?
They suggested them. They gave them this solution. I mean, the elders of Israel, they gave them the solution that they should go to the vineyards. So instead of giving them that solution, they could be matters and Adam.
Why would they matter the Shvuah? Why would they matter the Shvuah?
And instead they gave them that solution.
Right. Good question. I'm not sure. I don't. It seems like there must be an obvious answer because that's an obvious question, actually. Why weren't they matter the Shvuah?
Rabbi Miller said
that.
He said in those days, a neder and a shvuah had the utmost importance. They would never touch it. It was like the holiest thing.
Right.
Rather than be marked the neder, they found a loophole because it was so important.
Could be. I'm not sure about that. That's what it could be. I mean, later on, Yitzchak gets punished, but why didn't he go seek out?
He had to.
He should have been out this role. So why didn't they do that?
Way around it.
Possibly. That's why, because there was a way to avoid having to undo it. Could be. But I hear the question. Valid question, I think. So again, leaving that in mind, there must have been something that predated this whole epic of Tu B'Av. Says the Gemara weiter, another reason. It was the day when the Mesei Midbar stopped dying. The until the Mesei Midbar, the people from the Dar HaMidbar had not died out, the Dibor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not with Moshe. What does that mean? We know all along that it definitely was. Like Rashi tells us, it's possible that it wasn't either Pel Peh, or maybe it was Chezia and Laila. It was type of, or Paul, it was a type of vague or just an unclear type of communication between Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem. But the Shechina wasn't on him directly until the Mesei Midbar had been Mesei Midbar. Shenemar ve'ikar shetam kol anshe milchama lamos, then vaydaber Adonai Elai. Elai haya hadibor. When everybody died out. What happened then? So the Yerushalmi, Rashi brings it down from a Tanya, which is very interesting why he did it from Yerushalmi, but it's not tangential. The Yerushalmi in Tanya brings down what is also mentioned in the Medrash Eicha. The Brisa, the Yerushalmi or the Medrash, whatever, records that Hashem had made the shvur that because of what they did, no one was going to go into Eretz Yisrael. They were all going to die out. So what would they do? Every Tisha B'Av, a crew would go out. Moshe would make a proclamation. It's Tisha B'Av, and they're going to die because of the first time, right? Hashem says, "I'm going to give you something to cry about." So they thought, okay, every Tisha B'Av they're going to be dying. And they would dig graves. Moshe Rabbeinu would tell them to dig. They would dig graves. They would climb into the graves. They would lay down, not get up. This happened for decades. Comes the last year before they go into Eretz Yisrael. Again, Moshe Rabbeinu makes the proclamation. Everybody digs, lies down in their graves. And mind you, this is 15. There's a huge piece of Israel. They're all going into their graves, not waking up. Comes the last year, they go in. Nothing happens. Everybody gets up. They go back. The 10th day, they figured maybe we made a mistake with Lavan. Maybe it's not the 10th. It wasn't so easy. You couldn't put a calendar. Everything was lunar. It was very difficult. They go back in Yud Ba'av. Again, nothing happens. This keeps happening until they're sure that they had passed. When are they sure? By Tes Vav Av. The moon then, by the 15th and half of the month, is full. They know, okay, we didn't make a mistake in the calendar. It must have been Nisbat Hagzera and Kalu Meisei Midbar. They stopped dying. Now this new generation was going to be able to go into Israel. So the 15th day over here was a certain type of Chag, L'chayra. This Chag now happened before Putru Shvat and Zel and Zel. But 1 second, if that was the Chag, that because they realized that they had stopped dying, shouldn't that have been Tisha B'Av? Because initially it was Tisha B'Av, they would die. So now you only realize until Tes Vav Ba'av, that doesn't make the Tes Vav, it means the Tes wasn't as Batal Hagzera, so then it should have been the Yom Tov. The simple answer is because they were still doubtful, they didn't know yet, they didn't have that Amunah that they were going from death to life. It only hit them on the 15th. When it really hit them, when they realized there was this type of Slicha Mechila also, that's when they made a Yom Tov. That's a simplistic approach, no? Otherwise, why would Tes Vav Av be the Yom Tov and not Tes Av? Then the Gemara goes weiter. What was the other reasons? Ula Amar Yem Shebitel Hashem Ben Eila the Prusdoyes. Prusdoyes is a Latin word, means basically protection or guards. Some have Prusdios, Prusderes. Shahoishiv Yerov Ben Avad al Drom Jalel Yisrael Regel. Yerov Ben Avad would put these guards, not allowing anybody to enter to go up the road to Yerushalayim. Came along Hashem Ben Eila and he got rid of these. Now there was open passage. He said anybody who wants to be able to go up can go up. So that was another Yom Tov. But again, this was all chronologically, this was later. The other answer of Masnamar, Yom Shenitnu Haruge Beitar Likmura. It was the day when the Haruge Beitar, after that whole Makoma happened, and Hadrianus didn't let them be buried. When they finally Nitin Likmura, they made a Yom Tov. Amar Rav Masna also, Oisa Yom Shenitnu Haruge Beitar Likmura, Tiknu Biyavne Hatoy V'Hameitiv. The Baruch Nehemiah was established from that epic. Hatoy Shalei Hisrichu, the good that the corpses didn't have a stench. The Hameitiv Shenitnu Lekvura, and Hashem's that who's meitiv because now they were finally given proper kvura. Rabbi Yosef Damitraval Yom Shepasku Milifreis Eitzim Lamaracha. Another reason, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, they say was the day on Tes Vav Ba'av when they would stop having to fell the trees. They would need Atzim Aracha for the Kavanis. By Tes Vav Ba'av, Rashi is masbid. That's when the weather is best dry, and the wood wouldn't get wormy. So that was like a Yom Tov, that they had the best type of wood. They wouldn't need to cut it. Wonderful. Tanya B'Yazar Gadol Omer. From the 50th of Av and on, the koyach of the chama gets weaker, or it's further. Okay. Again, same thing. It gets weaker, so therefore it wouldn't affect the trees, and therefore it wasn't so wormy. The quality was better. Amar of Menashia, Vikarule, Yom Tavar Mago. They would call that day because it was a Yom Tov for them. Tavar Mago, the breaking of the Mago, the sickle knife that they would use to cut it down. Mikan ve'elach, so the something seemingly odd or bizarre relation. Mikan ve'elach, the Moisif Yosef, whoever adds, udelo Moisif, whoever doesn't add, Yei Asef, Miloshin Yei Asef al Amod, he will expire. Tani Rav Yosef, Ma Yei Asef, Amar Rav Yosef, what does that mean? Yei Asef, Tik Re'ime, his mother will bury him. What's it talking about? Someone who adds, he will add. Says Rashi. Mikan ve'elach, from Mechamisha Sabah ve'elach v'loisev v'leilei saleh yomim. Now that the nights are getting longer on the day, so you should be moisef v'lasek b'thera yosef chayim al chayim. You have more time to learn now at night, so you should be able to learn. And the more somebody learns at night, he takes advantage of these nights, he'll get more chayim. The lo yosef v'lasek b'thera v'leilei, somebody who's not utilizing these longer nights to learn. Wonderful. So those are the five reasons. These first two, and Hutar bin Yamin, those seem chronologically the earliest, or the Meisei Midbar. So again, so what was happening? We had the first two really happened on the same day that was happening in time of Shoftim. That was when it's at the end of Shoftim. It really happened much earlier in the book, even though it's recorded later. It happened earlier by Yeshua, and then they're saying that there was a Chag of Yomim Yamima, which L'chayra points to what was that Chag. That Chag may have been the other reason that we give right after the Shekalu Meisei Midbar. So they stopped dying. They hopped on that 15th day that the Gzer was bottled. And therefore, it's a huge simcha. So now maybe that sheds somewhat light between that and Yom Kippur. The awesomeness of Yom Kippur. What happens, Betzim? The idea that they were internalizing was what we also just had a few weeks ago. We're going to have now by Ekev. What happens a few weeks ago? The Torah tells us that by Yisrael Israel that they went from Lysaira to Bnei Yaakov. And that Moshe died in the interim by Har HaHar. He dies by Har HaHar, and then by Yifku Ben Israel Shloshim Yom. They cry for him, they mourn for him 30 days. But soon we have in Ekev, Moshe Rabbeinu is going over their whole history with them. And in the middle of his discussion about getting the lufas, he says that he comes out to get the lufas shnias. He tells them, so I get it, I come down, tells it the opposite way. And Sham Mesahar Veikov Sham. He died over there, as opposed to what we just had a few weeks ago. He died in by the Har HaHar. That was somewhere else geographically. So Rashi over here, he says very simple. Ma'anyana Lekan. He's no talk. Moshe is no talking to Israel about the Matan Torah episode. He came down, he got the lufas, and then also he sticks this in, which is also not only does he stick it in, the way he tells us the events happened seem to have been opposite or backward. So Rashi says because Be'etzem he died over there. What happened? What happened was that when Aaron was nifter, they got scared. Israel started going back. They wanted to go back there to Mitzrayim. There was internal fighting. Bnei Levi stops them. They went back a bunch of Masais until they went back 7 Masais actually, like Shiva. They were sitting Shiva, so to say. They went back Shiva Masais. On the 8th Masa, Bnei Levi catches them, the Torah and they tell us what he talked about. It's Aaron who was protecting us. Even Melech Aaron, the Melech of Canaan, he had, it was because of Aaron, like the Gemara Roshana tells us. Mashmur Shama, you heard that Mace Aaron. And then once they internalized that it was because of Aaron, that's when they actually mourned for Aaron. That's what the Torah is telling us over here. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us, Shah Mace Aaron. Not literally. He died actually not that much earlier by Harahar. It was only then when they internalized it, that's when they said. Because the Torah there says they Pishleishim Yod. He says it only hit them here. They couldn't mourn. They were too busy, thinking, oh, Aaron died, let's go back, it's terrible, they're gonna kill us. Only after it sunk in did they sit. Same thing by the Mesei Midbar. By the Mesei Midbar, they went from a whole change mentally. They went from thinking every year for decades they're having 15,000 dying, digging their own graves, lying in it, and dying. The last one, they were still Mesopik. Are they going to? Maybe we made a mistake. Toast, this, that. Once it really sinks in on Tu B'Av, it's to make the Yom Tov. I heard a cute part from I forgot who it was, Rav Yitzhak. He was quoting, I think his name was Rav Shwed. I didn't even know. He was quoting the Igeres HaTshuva from the Rebbe, the first Rebbe. He said, supposedly the Rebbe there says that by the bracha of Slach Lanu, if a guy doesn't actually believe that he can go from irrevocable slicha or from chaton to irrevocable slicha, you make a safek bracha. And safek bracha, you shouldn't make the bracha. You shouldn't say Rodem Chanan Marva V'Sleya. If you think that there's a shemetz, Hashem is not moichel v'seleya, you shouldn't make the bracha. So this concept is what they were internalizing, that they went from pure chaim, they went from pure misa, the oynish that they went to pure chayim. When it sinks in, that's when they made the Yom Tov. Beautiful. The problem with this, though, is still, nevertheless, we're saying that on Yom Kippur they were dancing. It's actually not a problem with this. This explained it a bit. What was the significance of Tu B'Av? So that's taken care of, I think, in my humble opinion. I can understand. I can sort of sleep well at night. But still, l'chayr ton beer. Still, what does that have to do with Yom Kippur? You're telling me that even Yom Kippur they would go out on the holiest day of the year. They would go out dancing. So, in fact, there is some dispute about who wrote what in the Mishnah. Leaving the Gemara, going back to the Mishnah. Who said what? Who equated them to? That we know Rav Gamliel said that. But then who said the son of Bocher Inecha? Who brought the pasuk of Tzenu Re'en B'Noitziam Melech Shaleima? What's the shayla? Like, why are you bringing the second pasuk of B'Chein Hu Omer? How is that bolstering your first point that you're saying Tzenu Inecha B'Yoyfi, this and that? And then the bigger question of Yom Kippur, they were dancing in like Yom Kippur, when Adar was telling us, the Gemara Numa tells us Eliyahu Navi met, I forgot who it was, I think it was an Amor, not a Tanada. Eliyahu Navi tells him, you want to know why I didn't yet come? Because there was a fellow who was boiled of Sula even on Yom Kippur, or a father and a son, all these Maisim Noiroim on Yom Kippur, because Chazal was so makbid on Yom Kippur, they would send out Shoimrim to be makbid on Tznius. And you're telling me now, Rosh Gamliel is saying that Yom Kippur, they were going out dancing in white clothes. So, how much longer do I have? So, when's Marav?
As long as you keep us interested, you keep talking.
So there's actually some dispute, like I said. There's a fellow Tzvi Molter or Henry Molter. He was probably from the first ones of the academic world who published a Masechta critically. That means he took all the different manuscripts, he edited it, he showed different years, which one was best, and yada yada. This was I think in the early 20s. So he put out, and he was the first one who did it. It was similar to the Diktuke Sefer, which we all know from Rav Rabinowitz. But he wasn't allowed to have the shas, and on the bottom he only had a few. He had maybe four or five manuscripts, most of Munich, and on the bottom he would show some different size. Motor had the whole Gemara, doing a much more critical job. This was like a proper Masechta. He brings on the bottom over there. I don't have it here, and he brings over there that this the Chen Hu Omer is not found in most manuscripts. The Rambam has a different girsa. He goes on to count a bunch of nuschais, a bunch of manuscripts, which the Tukei Seferim didn't bring, and it comes out that this whole thing is butchered. What really may have happened? So as follows. But let's perhaps with one more thing. Is Yerushalmi in Ksubis, in the beginning of the second paragraph, Yerushalmi is talking about a woman who is Nisarmela or Nisgarsha. And she's saying she was either widowed or divorced, and now she's saying, however, that I get a full ksuba because he married me as a psula. That's the Mishnah. And what does he get? Machlek is fine. Goes on to say the Gemara. What happens if there's Aiden? There's Aiden that says she went out bihinuma. Her hair was done a certain way. So there's actually there. And then the Gemara says, I think it was Yochanan, or maybe even Rav Shimon Gamliel. I forgot who it was who said it. That even if she went out on Yom Kippur with her hair done, that alone would be proof that she was Taka Psul and she got married, and she would get a full Psul. Wonderful. Yom Kippur, the Gemara mentioned, she would go out Yom Kippur. First of all, if it's referring to this Yom Tiv that we know of, or how Rashbag was describing what was going on in Kippur, why not mention also Chamisha Zabav? So there was a fellow, Rabbi Safra Tamar. Rabbi Safra Tamar was a Yusam Chacham. Unfortunately, he's not that known. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the Mizrahi, where he is, most of his library went to Alon Shvut, and over there they somewhat rehabilitated his Torah. Rabbi Safra Tamar wrote a parish in Yerushalmi, Ali Tamar. His son is actually more known. Unfortunately, his son was a fine Talmid Chacham and a Chayker. His son wrote a lot on the Arid, Beis Yosef, Kabbalah, but his father was a real old school Talmid Chacham, and he was from the unique Mefarshim that Mechabrim who wrote a parish on the Yerushalmi. He brings over there that L'chayra, why did they pick Yom Kippur? What's going on there? And he refers to the Targum in Eicha that we mentioned earlier. So then he says, but one second, Taka, so why not Chamisha Saba'av? So he gives a simple reason. It could be because Yom Kippur was that was the day, it was Nechras, everybody is in their minds. So that's why they chose that, possibly. But then he goes on and he brings that a fellow by the name of Tzvi Kapishtik, I forgot his name, he wrote a Maimon on Tzaifa, and this, I think his name was Kapishtik, or maybe I'm mispronouncing it, he quotes from a book, Oyhel David, from Sassoon, famous Sassoon family, the big philanthropists in India and China. They were very wealthy fellows, originally from Iraq, and they had a massive library of all different things. And in this Oyhel David, he quotes as follows. He says that he saw in a parish of quoting Rav Hai Goin, that Rav Hai Goin said Rav Shriya Goin, that really in this Mishnah, the whole end describing the dancing had nothing to do, there's not going back on Yom Kippur. Two separate things. In Kabbalah and the Kabbalah. It's a fascinating read because it's the halal, not the mashmos of Mishnah. It seems like it's both together, even though it may not make sense at first, like what's the dancing have to do with Yom Kippur. But the read definitely does go together, but he brings from the Goinim, Rav Haiga and Rav Shriya, that this whole dancing shekel has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. In Kane, it makes more sense. Why the Yerushalmi is not referring to Chamisha Zabav, and also why it's not mentioning the dancing, because it didn't happen. That's according to that. Others go ahead and give a nice mussar. They explain that it's not talking about all these psukim. It's talking about, like the Medrash says, anytime it's a Melech Shalom in Shir Shirin, so Hamelech Shalom, Hamelech Shalom Shaloi, and we're telling Hashem, so to us, and yada yada. In fact, the Divrei Yisrael, Yisrael Veretz, he was a dine in Budapest. In his Chuvas Divrei Yisrael, Divrei Yisrael, he has a simon over there, and he says the whole simon is just about trying to understand what is this shaykhs. Even though it's a shaykhs Chuvas, he's trying to understand what was going on here, and he brings down that he brings from a few people who wrote to him. He said I never found a good shot. At the end, he brings down from the who was it? The Tiferes Yisrael on the Mishnayos and Yochanan Boaz, where the Yochanan Boaz, if you look up at this on this last mission in Tainus, he gives a whole nice musar to how, like I said, the pasuk is talking to Hashem and how Hashem spoke down to us, and don't look at our avonis, look at this, yada yada. And the Divrei Yisrael says, and I'm sure Mutachani, if you read this every day with Tiferes Yisrael, B'kol Ram, they have a lot of Yeshuas and yada yada. Okay, it's very nice, but again, it's not Pashup Pshat. It doesn't seem like it. Okay, Al Kopanim, what do we have? We have the Mishnah that seems that it's talking, just to wrap it up, because we are getting late. We see the simplistic reading is Rosh Hashanah is telling us both Yom Kippur and Chamisha B'Sva'av, they would go dancing, they would have this huge singles event. Why? Because the simple pshat again, it was because of the slichum mechila that we got, transforming the person totally, spiritually, also ideologically, realizing being maked that he's giving us now a new slate, even on Tu B'Av. Why? Because on that first Tu B'Av, that's when we realized that we were getting a new slate. We were going to go on Eretz Yisrael then. After that came along the other reasons, and everyone took advantage of, the 15th day is an ominous day, it's a wonderful tzachar, yom yamima. So that's when they made the whole hutru shvatim lavei. That's also when Binyamin was allowed to be again part of Bnei Israel. Interestingly, there's also, I saw in the drasha from, we have Yeshua ibn Shuaib. He was a Talmud of the Rashba, and he was a regular, Talmud of the Rashba, busy with Shazari, but he also has the famous drashas that he wrote. He wrote also a super commentary on Ramban, on the Kabbalistic pieces of Ramban. As you know, Ramban is replete with it, and therefore there's a bunch of Purushim actually, just on the Kabbalistic pieces of Ramban. So in his drashas, however, he said like this. I took a picture. If anybody would like, I can send it to you. And he says something very interesting. In this drush of this week, Parshas V'Eschanan, he starts off with this Mishnah. He goes into it again, discussing it nicely, allegorically, very nice, wonderful. But then he also mentions the Pashup Pshat, the reasons mentioned in the Gemara. And then he says something very interesting, which fell out of practice. He says, "V'lachei nohagu lasais hashabas hazeh achar tes ba'ov ki yom tiv." This Shabbos Nachamu, I don't think he would go to a hotel. He didn't seem the type, but he says they would make this Shabbos something. He yomted. V'hi mitzvah gedola shehu yom nechama. V'afal pi she'ena yomtiv mamish asu esa yom mekudesh l'chvoid haShabbos by b'yom tesvav u'lefa'amim hu yutes k'mayata b'zu hashana. And the year that he was writing, it would fall then, but either way, he said, regardless of the date, it was the Shabbos that would follow the Tes B'Av. V'kol hasamech v'ezech menacham es binyan beis hamikdash Moshe Nemes Henu Ra'enu B'Netzion. Beautiful, and he ends off with the rest of that Mishnah. So this is very interesting. He's telling us that the Shabbos after Tisha B'Av, they would make Kiyom Tiv. I would imagine, especially in this shul where they hang up, eggs and whatnot, they would make also something unique. Something that to bring back the old school, they would bring it back according to these drushes. That day was something. In fact, even the Ritva, I don't think it's over here in Tainus. The Gemara, because this brisa that's brought later on Lamed is also mentioned in Bava Basra. The Mishnah is over here in Tainus. However, the whole brisa of the Bishlam Yom Kippur Fine. Tu B'Av Mai, that's brought in B'Av Basra. Over there, the Ritva also, if I'm not mistaken, he says that it's a Ktsas mitzvah to make simcha on this Yom Tov. After they got, there was even this, I don't know what point this I brought, maybe I was reading last. Point this I brought. It was a mitzvah and it was a very a celebratory date, which after the cap we find out something interesting. I found something interesting. I don't know if you guys will find, but I found Shirei Avram ben Chalfon. Avram ben Chalfon was one of the early Kaitanim in Aden, Italy. Aden, Yemen. Obviously out of the world, but Aden, Yemen. And he's going back in the 1200s. He was a big Talmud Chacham. We know from a bunch of his piyutim. He wrote piyutim on the scale of halakha, the shchita and whatnot. We know others how they refer to him in later generations. They're referring to him Adani, Ravon, they was Talmud Chacham and whatnot. But he also wrote a bunch of shir, a bunch of poetry, and he has a piyut devoted to Chamisha Asa Ba'av. His Tasei Rupnei Elyon Kinicham Hashem Tzion. It should be misbaser, get good the source, because Hashem was menachem. He meant, and he says he's going to go on and talk about the brias, and then he starts listing each of these things that are mentioned in the Gemara. B'yom zeh netzer mikedem negef mimesei midbar. On this day, that's when the negef, the magefa of them dying, had stopped. Ubinyamin the tza'ir roidim. It's an adjective that he's taking from Tehillim. The small was the Shifteya by his Chabar. He was Mischaber to the other Shvatim. We wrote to him to reply to my family after they were angry because of what they did. Okay, yada yada. Roin Patzchu Shvatim. The other Shvatim were open with Roin, Yom said. The Yeshavai Zeshazer. Why? Kivoi Lavai Zevazet. His Chaber Hutaru. And to be Mischaber wanted to intermarry. They were mutter. Then he goes on, anyways. You see that even Bisman, not even, primarily Bisman Rishonim, this was a big deal. Hamisha Saba'av. Why we don't do it today? I don't know. I mean, it seems like even the modern Israeli culture, they celebrate it more than us, because I didn't check, but I wouldn't be surprised if they have some type of singles weekend this week somewhere in Eretz Yisrael, some Moshav or whatnot. But the idea of this, the Valentine's Day, if you want to say, the idea of the love, which they think comes from Tu B'Av L'Choyer, is attached to the din, the Yom of Slicho Mechila. This concept that we had both on Yom Kippur and both on Tu B'Av the first time, where they realized that Hashem was moichel them and gave them a new slate of life. And that should lead us on time tomorrow.